So thank you guys so much for coming out and being here with us. We're here to talk about and celebrate a project that we've been working on over the past couple years called To Live and Dine in LA, Tupac's To Live and Die in LA that you heard as you were taking your seats was a kind of cultural and ideological inspiration for the issues that the book covers. That's it right there. It's not out yet. It's almost out. We've got pre-order cards here for those who are interested. You can pre-order online now. It'll be available the first week of June. And a quick, super fast background on what this project was and how we both got into it, and then we'll kind of dive into some of the content. This is a book based on the incredible menu collection of Los Angeles Public Library, the Central Library downtown. They've got 9,000 historic menus in their collection, and we decided to do a book that tried to use those menus that are LA menus to tell the first ever kind of long arc history of Los Angeles through restaurant menus. And so the very first thing when I was asked to do this project that I realized I needed to do was to have someone who wasn't me look at it, especially somebody who is a chef. And I had been familiar with what Roy was up to with Kogi, but really was blown away when I saw a lecture he gave at the Mad 3 conference that I don't know if people have been able to check out, but I urge you to go see. It's still up online on Vimeo, where Roy was talking about issues of restaurant success and the popularity of food in Los Angeles, and also the realities of food injustice and the kind of problems and struggles with food access that we're going to talk a lot more about. So I found a way to Roy. Thank you,
it was
Raka.
through Raka. Any Dilated People fans here? Come on, this is LA. Dilated.
Yeah, seriously.
Can't say it.
We wouldn't be here today without Raka.
Yeah, we wouldn't be here without Raka.
In many ways, actually. And Roy came, we brought him to the library and started checking out some menus.
Yeah, that was amazing. I mean, we met, Josh and I met outside on Central Avenue, and we had coffee together, and he was telling me about this project, and I don't know, I was hooked from the beginning. Unfortunately, I was going to co-author it with him, but unfortunately, due to the book that I already had out, I couldn't do it, but I stayed on as kind of a spiritual guide. But the first day, I knew that this project was amazing. The first day that we got access to the rare vault, the rare book vault in the LA Public Library, and we just started going through the menus, and it just felt like a time portal. You know, it really did. It was amazing.
Do you remember what your first reactions were? We started looking at, I think, mostly 19th century, there were banquet menus in Los Angeles. And I remember you had some very specific reactions to those.
Well, I mean, even from our first initial conversation, I like to go with my gut feelings on things. And when he approached me with this idea of how can we look at our city and the history of our city and who we are through the window of menus, and the first thing that came up to me was, you know, what can we through the menus? What can we see that was missing? And what I saw was a lot of affluent banquet-style menus, mainly taking place along Wilshire Boulevard. Actually, at that time, Beverly Hills didn't really exist yet, so it was really along Wilshire towards MacArthur Park. You know, really European-based, very opulent, heavy cream-based foods. But again, it made me think about there was a lot more to LA than just royal banquet halls. And again, it made me think about, like, what are we seeing through the menus? What are we not seeing? How were people getting food? There must have been different classes and working classes throughout our city at that time as well. Different access, abilities and access to food. And so it was a lot of the book. The theme of the book was what we see in the menu. What is that telling us that we don't see?
I really like the idea of heavy cream as a metaphor for racial hierarchies in Los Angeles.
Yeah, for sure.
I wish I had nailed that in the book. That's a great one. I'm going to steal that from you.
Okay.
Yeah. That should, if you want to
go in the second print.
Yeah, I like Roy Choi's Heavy Cream is a title of something, Roy, for your Twitter.
That's a restaurant name.
Yeah, yes, one that's only open after 3 a.m. And so once we started having these conversations, Roy really kind of opened my eyes to how to read and how not to read these menus. Yeah. And you know, any of you who've ever worked with collections or archives, when you look at 9,000 menus, you think, oh my God, look at all this stuff that is there. And really what you're looking at is all the stuff that's not there. You're looking at an archive of what's missing. And so those first conversations really shaped the way I started looking at these menus and what I was looking for. And I started working with a team of incredible undergraduates here at USC, where I teach, and incredible graduate students. And I want to give a big, sorry, I'm going to embarrass you, but a big shout out to Perry Johnson here in the second row, who not only researched like crazy, but I just want to, in the last 2 weeks, we had the unenviable task of coming up with 230 addresses and dates for every caption in the book. And Perry, like, against all odds, came up with almost all of them. So thank you. That would not have been possible without you. And the first meetings we had with students, we met at the library, but there was a second home to this project, this place, Three Worlds Cafe.
Oh, there it is.
And that's where we had some of our first research meetings about the project, and students met with Roy. And if people don't know about Three Worlds, I was hoping Roy would talk a little bit about Three Worlds as a place and as a venture.
Well, Three Worlds is right down the street here. It's on Central and 34th. It's a small project, but it's a big project in heart. It's about 4 years ago, as Kogi was kind of blowing up. You know, I was getting hit up a lot with a lot of companies and advertising things, and my head really wasn't in that space. I was still on the streets, cooking tacos. I was really raw and just, I couldn't see myself being like on an ad or anything like that at that time. And there was this company, the Dole Fruits Company, kept approaching me, really nice people, just like, we'd like to do something with you, and then. Instead of getting, in most cases, I just get angry and I just walk away. But in this case, something just hit me, and I was like, okay, a light bulb went off, and it was like, okay, if you have all this money to kind of invest in this program, if you really trust me, let me do something with that money. Instead of putting me in an ad, let's take that and do something productive with it. And they were down. I thought they were going to say no. And then so that was the result of Three Worlds Cafe. What happened was they wrote us a bunch of big checks, and we went into Jefferson High School for 2 years on the DL and built a program where we taught those kids how to do everything from Economics 101 to building a store, branding a store, naming it, developing recipes, learning how to sell. And that was for 2 years. And then what we saw was the budget cuts were coming for LAUSD, so we saw that our kind of life there was not going to last. And then again, another light bulb went off. The CRCD, which is a community redevelopment program, they had a cafe space. And so we just basically moved that whole program to a cafe. Now it sells smoothies on the street. So you should go by and support it if you're here in SC. And what we do is we do work-study programs for all the kids at Jefferson High. And it's a place where it's free internet, coffee, smoothies, so it's good. It's really good.
And it was, I think, that spirit of Three Worlds that at the very beginning of the project set the tone for the politics of the project, for the energies behind the project, around community, around trying to figure out the history of healthy food and unhealthy food, and the rise of the so-called food desert or food apartheid in Los Angeles. One of the things that when we started working on this book with the LA Public Library, major civic public institution, I had to grapple with the fact that this was going to be a book about menus, so texts from restaurants where people go to pay to eat, which is an experience that actually only a small portion of the city gets to do on a regular basis. So we've got roughly 25,000 places to eat in Los Angeles. And yet, according to the USDA, Los Angeles is the epicenter of hunger in the United States. So how does something like a public library do a book about really nice, fun places to go eat and spend money when the majority of the kids who are coming through the library every day actually have never eaten at a restaurant, perhaps? And in Roy's Math 3 talk and in the work that we were doing, these are some of the statistics that we just wanted to share. That LA County has the highest youth food insecurity rate anywhere in the country. We are number one. Nearly 2 in every 10 LA families are food insecure. Over half the adults in LA County are considered overweight or obese, with higher rates for African Americans and Latinos. 40% of children eat fast food at least once a week. Over 80% of LAUSD students come from food insecure homes. And LA and Southern California used to be known as a place of agricultural surplus, and now we are a place of agricultural scarcity. That was our challenge. Like, how do you talk about menus, and how do you use menus to understand this and to help think about some of these issues?
Yeah, you thought it was just going to be heavy cream, but
yeah,
it got heavy instead of the cream. Yeah.
That's right.
But yeah, that's real, you know. And it could have been like Josh had mentioned, it could have been a coffee table book and just focused on all the beautiful things, almost like a snapshot of Hollywood and, you know, and Charlie Chaplin and silent films, and just only showing a thumbnail of what our city is and was. But I don't know, that light bulb went off, and it just kind of was our North Star throughout the whole process.
And I think like there was, you know, this is one idea we were also playing with, the idea of a food bank society in the age of foodie society, right? How do you reconcile those two things? But one idea that, in starting to do the research, the historian Rebecca Spang has written a remarkable book about the history of the restaurant, the invention of the restaurant. She talks about the invention of the restaurant in the 18th century in France, which I knew nothing about, that the term restaurant comes from the French word for a restorative. Literally like a small consommé that people would go get at a little storefront to drink, to help with digestion, to help with to ease stomach problems, and that idea grew into what we now know of as the restaurant. People would start going to pay for these restoratives, and that grew into meals and other things. But I like the idea of the restorative, not so literally. Like, how can restaurants restore something? How can restaurants and food be used to restore ideas around justice, ideas around community and equality? And how can these menus be a kind of way in? And one of the biggest challenges as someone writing about these menus was like, okay, we all read menus all the time. When you go to restaurants, you read them casually. You decide, you use them in the utilitarian way that they're meant to be used. What's available? How much will it cost? What's it going to come with? Yep. It helps guide you, right? But we slowly realize that menus they're more like short stories. They're more like novels.
Yeah.
You know, they are social texts. They're urban texts. They're pieces of fiction, and they are written. And so I wanted Roy to put up one of your menus.
That's not from the archive.
It's not from the archive. It will be. I wanted to put up one of Roy's menus to get you to talk a little bit as a chef. Like, how do you approach a menu? I mean, what is a menu to you?
Okay. I haven't seen any of the slides, so I'm as surprised as you. This is my menu from Pot, which is in Koreatown. It was a huge project. You know, I'm a Korean kid that was raised here in Los Angeles, and second generation. And for many immigrant kids that are brought with first generation parents, we have a little bit of a divide, whether you're Chicano or Korean American, Cambodian, whatever. It doesn't matter. You know, our parents weren't raised here, but we're having to go through the school system and be raised here, and so there's always this kind of double life of home life, outside life, and then also not being able to express your identity in a succinct way. Sometimes you're not really Korean, but you're not really American, and so Pot was kind of our exploration of that. It was like, let's put ourselves right in the epicenter of Koreatown, but let's not be a Korean restaurant. Let's be a Korean American restaurant, and let's explore how it is with all those things that I couldn't say to my parents, or all those things I couldn't say to my uncles, or because I don't speak the language, or because the philosophies are different, or the expectations are different, but I'm still Korean. So how can I kind of put my own footprint and thumbprint on being Korean? And that's what Pot became. And it was, you know, and you know, the name was just so killer. The name at the beginning actually changed at the 11th hour, because it was going to be called Ham, and it was going to be all vegetarian. And and then I was so stuck on that name. It was going to be Ham, all vegetarian Korean. You guys were going to love it. And usually my team never pulls me aside, but they pulled me aside at they kept it going. They kept the charade going, and I was on it. I was on the horse. Like, it's gonna be Ham. And then I don't know what happened. They must have been convening on the side or something, and they caught me, and they were like, "Dude, we cannot go with Ham and be vegetarian." And then at that moment, Pot came to my mind, and then the restaurant became centered around hot pots. and obviously it's a double entendre, but it just allowed us to really speak about a lot of things, to introduce, to speak about pot culture without it being a bad culture, to write a menu about hot pots and double dipping and sharing and flavors, and combine all of those feelings together, and then the names became little poems to my life. Like Redondo Beach is a place I used to go as a kid to crack crabs, so that became the crab pot. The Boot Knocker, obviously, I grew up in late 80s, early 90s, hip-hop, R&B, but that goes back to a Korean history of that stew was an army boot stew where during just after the Korean War, they used to take the army boots and the leather to make basically the umami for the stock. And
I thought it was just a Candyman reference.
Yeah, no, it's deeper. Okay. Yeah, we're going heavy, okay. Right? Jamal Wilkes, L.A. Laker, but that's a silky tofu pot, and obviously, if y'all Laker fans, what's another good one? There's a UOK way. That's a L.A. term, but in Korean is UK, which is like raw beef. So there's a lot of that going on there. I'll give one more fun one. Let me see. Oh, steam room, I think was a fun one, because in Koreatown we're known for our saunas and our steam rooms, and then that's a steamed pork with steamed tofu and kimchi, and then so it was again this kind of poem to Koreatown, saunas, the fascination with saunas and Korean food, my history with it, and then the actual cooking technique. So there is a lot of story in the menu.
It's a lot of story. I mean, I think it is one of the best examples I've actually ever seen in looking at all the menus that we looked for this project, of a chef going out of his or her way to really tell stories and to really kind of guide you through a process that is not just, this isn't just about quote unquote just about the food. It's the food as a gateway to understanding neighborhood and community and history. And even in the middle there's almost the back of a book blurb where Roy talks about exactly what the history of the restaurant is, right, and tells you what's been shaping his choices on this menu. Talk about design for a minute. How much of visual design, because that's a big part of the book. There's 220 menus, something like that, 220, 240 menus reproduced in this book, full color, big book. And it's part of the menu story is about design. It's about what things look like and how menus are designed to also tell stories.
Well, design was a huge part of POT, obviously, and it was a huge part of all the venues at the hotel, and actually all the venues that I'm involved with, and even Kogi. Kogi is all about design. The way that the truck is, it looks like it's beat up, but it's like perfectly beat up. And it's like it's supposed to be that way.
Like acid wash jeans.
Yeah, kind of, but real. But real. It wasn't. Yeah, but it's just a natural decay of and life. But with this one, we hired a person named David Irvin who runs a company called Folklore, and he started his career in graphic arts through albums, making album covers, and he just has a really wonderful way of looking at things. And him and I just connected right away, and we were able to speak shorthand, almost like us when we started with this book. Be able to speak shorthand from the moment we met, and for us, like for POT, it was to create kind of like a newspaper, and kind of like an old newspaper where everything stood out in headlines. And then the color grabs you. It was very powerful and in your face, but at the same time you couldn't get mad at it. So I think a part of the design is this picture of the lady. It's a lady smoking a big blunt, right? But it's a real picture from a real person, from a photographer we knew who went to North Burma and was in the village and took that picture. And so there's authenticity to it. It's not like they're for no reason, And even though it's a very overt picture, you can't get mad at it. And so that was all part of the design as well, for you to be shocked, but also to be intrigued,
One of the starting to do the research on the history of menus and the history of restaurants for this book. was realizing that in French, one of the words for menu, C-A-R-T-E, carte, is the same word for map. And started thinking about menus as maps, menus as ways of thinking about how cities were actually mapped. And there were a lot of menus that actually had maps on their covers. This is a Bullock's Tea Room menu from 1937, when the Tea Room was on 7th and Broadway. And you can see, it goes from Malibu on the west and ends with Union Station on the east. And that was the map of Los Angeles. And leaving off all of East Los Angeles, leaving off points north and many points south, right? Ending in a way with USC and the airport. And so a lot of the things that menus, and we've got lots of menus in the exhibit for this book, which will open on June 13th. We've got a lot of the map menus out so that you can kind of see how restaurants are imagining urban space. And Roy, I wanted to ask you, with Kogi, so much of what you were doing was taking the restaurant into the streets, obviously. Yeah. What did you learn with Kogi about the map of LA, about how difficult and how joyous it is to travel the great map of Los Angeles?
Well, for me, it wasn't really a learning experience in so much as it was like me reconnecting and trusting and believing in the things that I loved about the city, because I used to cruise a lot in the city when I was younger, and I had so many friends from all over, and I was when I was younger I was in a low riding club, so we cruise all throughout, and but like in many cases those things from my family and other sources were told that I was just wasting my time. I had to go do something actually that was meaningful, but that was meaningful to me. But when I was young, I couldn't really defend it. But then going back out with the truck, I was just doing what I was doing when I was younger, but I had food this time. And but what I really enjoyed was just continuing to go out further. So what I learned about the two different things in the city, what I learned is being able to reshape stereotypes. Here in the city, a lot of people were calling taco trucks roach coaches. A lot of people not from East LA or Boyle Heights or Huntington Park or parts of downtown, but more west, weren't really experiencing taco trucks, and they only saw them either as nuisances or something on the construction site or something that was dirty, which is wrong. And so I think through Kogi, we were able to just allow people to experience it and see how beautiful it is. As I started going further with the truck, out to the valley, out to like La Puente, West Covina, out to Monrovia, all the way down to Long Beach, Signal Hill, Paramount, Southgate, Cerritos, Lakewood, just started to really connect with a bunch, in Carson, Hawthorne, Inglewood, just connecting with homies, man. Straight up, just feeding Los Angeles, just from the heart, and just seeing everyone light up, and block parties, just impromptu block parties, and everyone having a good time. So that was a beautiful thing.
Were you made aware? And I know you were aware of this before, but in going to all those neighborhoods, traveling across the city, were you made aware in a very visceral, upfront way about kind of the limits of where food goes in the city? That were you finding that you were hitting some neighborhoods that that kind of experience hadn't been there before?
We were very lucky in the fact that Kogi was just, we were just, I don't know, it was just a special moment in time where everyone trusted us. And when we came out, it was like the book fair came to town. You know what I mean? Like everyone was happy. And there were no limits. The limits were actually being broken with Kogi, and it was an amazing thing. Everything shifted. Everything changed. Parking lots became auditoriums. Families and generations that never talked to each other started hanging out. People you thought were scary were not scary. Were just there to get a burrito and 2 short rib tacos.
Never just one.
Never just one. Like what I mean by that is like, especially like Carson, they got big ass Samoans out there, right? And then they're all waiting in line, and the first time we went to Carson, we were just like, all right, we got this. And then, because our lines are long, so we have to stare at them for like an hour. So they're just all yoked and standing right there like that. And then they come each time just coming closer and closer and closer. And then so then when they get to the window, it was like they're like kids again. Can I have 2 short rib tacos and 2 burritos? And so it just brought the kid out in everyone. So for me, to be honest, it was actually breaking the limits.
Yeah.
You know,
No Booyah Tribe reunions.
no,
No. So one of the things we started going through, I wanted to show this menu as I think a really good example of how complicated the maps are, issues of race, economics that the book and the project talks about, some of the things that Roy's own work deals with. So this is from a barbecue restaurant from 1946, Van's Louisiana Barbecue, that was on Florence between Maine and San Pedro. And so you've got a barbecue restaurant in a neighborhood that then was predominantly working class white, on a menu that's got advertising from a Mexican beer with a bullfight on it. And this is during World War II. And so a lot of restaurant menus during the war were rationing. And so you will find information about food rationing on menus saying that certain things won't be available. And this one goes a step further, right, and tries to intervene through racial politics, where war is war. Every defense stamp that you buy pays the postage to send a Jap to hell, right, on a menu. And with a reprint about rationing and war politics from a newspaper. So you have this really obviously troubling, but at the time a fairly standard collision of war rationing, cultural mixture of Southern barbecue in a white neighborhood with Mexican beer ads and anti-Japanese racism.
It's crazy.
All living on a menu.
Yeah.
And so that this project got really hard really fast, where it wasn't just going to be like, oh, look, they were serving chicken a la king. Like, no, that's not what this became. It became about how do we use food and use menus to understand some of these complexities.
And it made us also think about the city as well. I mean, obviously in the context in which he's talking, but also geographically, you know, us living now, we think of our city as it is, but a lot of the stuff that we think of wasn't there during that time. You know, like the whole West Side really wasn't the West Side, and you know, South LA was kind of the West Side. You know, and so it's just like really reshaping, you know, how we look at our city and where everyone was living, where food was coming from. I always had the big question of like, where was food coming from? You know, like there were not many refrigerators, markets, you know, like how not everyone had a car, how, you know, and then where were you living, where were the different classes and races living, and how was food getting delivered, how was it being stored, and I don't know if we ever answered those, but those were some of the things that I thought about. And then obviously seeing menus like this, it made you think about what was being communicated. If this was being on the menu, imagine what's being said not on the menu.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, imagine how we were treating each other back then, you know?
One of the things that we started noticing about where food came from is, you know, now I'm sure we're all familiar with like going out to eat at restaurants that are proud of being farm to table, right? This is the big thing, right? Mm-hmm. Farm to table, farm to plate, as something that really most people will say originated in the 1980s or so, as part of the California food revolution.
Yeah, with Alice Waters.
With Alice Waters up north.
Wolfgang. Yeah.
Absolutely. As a response to the kind of industrialization of food that happens mid 20th century. But you go back and look at all these early menus pre-World War II, and of course, obviously, what do you find? I didn't even expect it, but it's so obvious that everything was farm to table. Yeah. So that you had restaurants from the teens and 20s that all of the, anytime they mentioned chicken, it told you where the chicken came from. It would tell you what farms it was from. Most of it were local. You know, sand dabs from Catalina. Yeah. Right. That so there were these periods where you could actually see that this idea of farm to table, though it means something very specific to the present moment, you know, we're kind of getting back in some ways to how people ate before the industrialization of food. There was even, this isn't in the book, but I just recently found a postcard from a restaurant called Willard's, which is in Los Feliz and also was one on Pico on the west side, and they're famous for their chicken. And part of their promo in the 30s was all of our chicken go right from the farm to table. So I was like, okay, this is good. And then they add a little thing, without their feet ever touching the ground. You know, just like, whoa, okay, I don't know if that counts as organic. but a lot of menus talk about
Yeah.
that. And so it was really interesting to see how these food systems change over time. And one of the things that Roy said the very first time we were looking at those banquet menus, actually one just like this. This is the first menu in the library's collection. It's from 1875. This is from a banquet on Alameda downtown at Don Mateo Keller's.
Amazing, right? You guys, like, imagine touching these things and going through them.
Don Mateo Keller his real name was Matthew Keller. Is an Irish immigrant, businessman in Los Angeles who stumbled upon a land grant opportunity, and he bought a small parcel of land that we now know of as Malibu. And he took some of his money, and he had a winery downtown Los Angeles in the 19th century. We were a wine capital of the United States. There's still wine grapes in the official city crest in Los Angeles. Many of the streets downtown are named after vintners, like Vignes, as we all say, Vignes Street, right? Vignes Street, that's one of the original vintners in Los Angeles. And this is from a private banquet he held in 1875. And in the book, I asked Nancy Silverton to rewrite this menu if she was going to serve it today. And like watching Nancy Silverton try to figure out with me, like, why did they serve so many different kinds of meats and roasts? You know, it was just like, it was
I
amazing.
totally hear Nancy's voice asking that question.
She was like, why is there, boiled rump beef and leg of mutton? Like, why do you need that? So we started looking at menus like this, but then raised the big questions that Roy asked, which is like, oh, that's all fine and good, but where did everybody else eat? Where did the working classes eat? And L.A., once we started doing the research, L.A. was known in the early part of the 20th century as being an affordable place to eat. It was part of its selling point, that people knew that they could come here and eat working class lunches and working class prices. And so in the book, we've got tons of menus from lunchrooms. LA is the capital of the lunch. This is the first menu in the collection from 1905 that has a priced bill of fare, not a banquet menu. This is at Tate's downtown, where lunch specials for 35 cents. Got cold salmon with mayonnaise sauce, veal cutlet and spaghetti, a small coffee, and a glass of either Anheuser-Busch pale lager or a glass of claret or white wine for 35 cents. Not bad, right? Come on, Roy, bring it back. Come on.
That's the throwback Thursday menu.
Do it. Put your money where your mouth is, Choi. Come on.
I'm trying.
Yeah.
I'm trying, man. I'm down to $2 on my food, man. I'm trying.
And then there's things like I still don't know what half of it is. English snipe, Galatine of Capon. Anyway. So we've got the whole history of the lunch counter and the importance of the affordable meal. LA was a place where you could go to eat an affordable lunch. And there were people, actually, I wanted to bring up someone that I don't know if Roy realizes he's a kind of indirect descendant of, a guy named Al Levy. And Al Levy had really the first most profitable, not a food truck, because this was in the late 1800s, but had an oyster cart that he would peddle oysters around downtown Los Angeles. And his business grew so much that he created a little mini empire of 5 oyster-based restaurants. This is from one of his later ones from the, I think, late 19-teens, at Al Levy's Grill, where he put his old oyster cart, where he originally got successful, and he popped it on top of his restaurant. So that you understood the relationship between Kogi and Pot, between the oyster cart, and the oyster restaurant. So I wanted to ask you about, like, where you see that relationship between street food and formal restaurant culture.
Well, I think I wrote about it briefly in the foreword of we were writing this book on menus, but in many cases we're a city that also existed so much in a culture of eating that with no menus or scribbled menus or handwritten menus or chalkboard menus or verbal menus. And it really, as we're researching these menus, it made me really think about how do we represent, or how can we stand up for all of that culture in life, especially the immigrant culture of where, menus aren't written. Sometimes you're just approaching a cart and the menu is understood. Sometimes the food is only 1 or 2 items, so there's no need for a menu. But that's food too. That's LA culture. That's LA history. And sometimes it's written on the back of a cardboard box that you got the produce in. But then that box gets thrown away, almost like street art gets painted over. So then how do we reconcile and put that spirit into the book as well. I think so. I think more than any other city, our city, I guess my answer to that is our city lives and breathes outside of the menu as it does in the menu.
Absolutely.
You know.
Yeah, and in your forward, you talk a lot about speed and mobility, right? And kind of experiencing LA from your car. And I'll flip through to some of these. We're not going to have time for everything, but I want to get to these car. So we have a lot of menus that represent the kind of rise of car culture in the 1930s in Los Angeles, where it went from getting in your car, instead of walking to a restaurant and having lunch during work downtown. Once the city starts to spread out and move west and north and south, people were driving to eat. But then, by the 30s, with the rise of drive-ins, people were driving their car to a restaurant to eat in their car. Right? Like that's a very LA thing.
It was a new thing, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
and these
your
were
car's
some
probably
of the,
better in your home.
That's right. And probably nicer than the restaurant.
Yeah.
And these were some of the... So there's lots of menus that express the centrality of cars. But I wanted to show these two in particular, the Witch Stand being one of the most prominent drive-ins that a lot of menu collectors are very... that they write a lot about. The Witch Stand because of its googie architecture and all this. But I became less interested in like nostalgia about these places as modernist symbols of the city. As I started to learn and be reminded that when you went to most of these restaurants in the 1930s and 1940s, these were for the most part all white. That these were whites-only establishments. African Americans could not eat at these restaurants. It's been left out of the retellings of a lot of these stories. And the Witch Stand, which is usually kind of remembered very fondly as this modernist icon, was actually the site of one of the very first sit-ins in LA history. In 1952, African-American teenager Andrew Murray was refused service, and he went and got his friends and protested and had one of the biggest sit-ins in LA history at the Witch Stand. And then at a restaurant like the Nickel Del on Melrose, similarly remembered, I stumbled on a story by Buddy Collette, the late, great Watts jazz musician, who said that the Nicodel was on Melrose, right near the Paramount backlot, Paramount Studios, and Buddy was one of the musicians playing on the You Bet Your Life show. And he talked about how during a break one day, all the musicians would go eat at the Nicodel, and he was black, and he had a white girlfriend. And they walked into the restaurant, and the maitre d' freaked out. Mm-hmm. And put him in a place, according to Buddy, in a restaurant where everyone could stare at them and make them feel uncomfortable. And Buddy joked, and he said, the only good thing about the Nicodel's menu was how large it was. They're huge menus. He said, so we could hide our faces. And he actually went on to, at the Crystal Tea Room on 58th and San Pedro after that, started using a tea room restaurant to hold multiracial jam sessions and community meetings, and using another restaurant as a model, a building.
And a small little footnote to where we started this project at Three Worlds is where a lot of the black artists had to stay on Central Avenue at the Dunbar Hotel. They would play at these type of restaurants or hotels or banquets that probably, I'm just thinking about it now, that are probably related to a lot of these menus that we're looking at. And these big halls over by MacArthur Park, Park Place Plaza, but they couldn't stay at these or even eat at the same places they were playing at, so they'd come back down to Central Avenue, which is exactly where Three Worlds is. So that's kind of deep, man. Like the whole circles of that happening in that way. But that's a little footnote to that.
Absolutely. And I brought some of these as examples of how menus also were representing race in Los Angeles, particularly the African-American culture. This is Carl's from the 1930s. It was at Crenshaw, Vernon, and View Park. This is a gatefold plantation menu. So LA 1930s, African-American butler answering the door at a at a plantation house in South LA. And then you have menus like the Old Dixie on Western. This is from 1950, Western and 42nd. This is a white-owned restaurant with white cooks, white waiters, white organist playing in the Mint Julep Ballroom in the back of the restaurant. But for every one of those, then we've got restaurants like the Golden Bird, which was one of the longest running African-American owned restaurants in Los Angeles. The Golden Bird Fried Chicken Restaurant opened in 1957 on West Adams by Zelma and James Stennis, and were just preempted in 47 by Fatburger, I don't know how many people realize a fat burger was created by an African-American woman, and was one of the great early examples of black-owned restaurants. One of the things I was really happy we were able to do with the book is not just pinpoint some of the earliest restaurants in the city, but the earliest black restaurants in Los Angeles from the 1890s up and down San Pedro. The first, so they called themselves race restaurants, restaurants that only catered to African Americans.
So Old Dixie was right around here, off MLK and Western.
Absolutely. And then you've got many menus representing Chinese food, Cantonese dining. This was a white-owned restaurant on Fairfax that, on the one hand, is obviously should raise some alarm bells for us. Maxie's Singapore Spa with a very caricatured racist image on the cover. And then on the back, it boasts of having the finest collection of Chinese carvings in the United States. Right? And they had these elaborate cocktail lounges and jade bars and all of these things. So there was all of this in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, these weird collisions between kind of racial exoticism and fear, and also love at the same time.
Yeah, collection and really like mining for that stuff and being a collector of it.
Absolutely. And I wanted to then just show one more example of how restaurateurs took over that story and tried to reposition what the work that their menus could do. And these are two examples of Asian American restaurant owners who put their faces on the covers of their own restaurants. And I hope I'm going to share. I don't know if you remember this, but I sent this photo. I sent a scan of this image to Roy with nothing in the email. I think I just sent it to you. Mm-hmm. And Roy's reply right back was like, "Gangsta shit."
Did I say that?
Yes, you did.
I don't remember. I don't recall.
Yeah, you would never say anything like that. But like, why is that gangster to you?
Look at his stance, and it just, I think I said it. I didn't say it as a joke. I said it as a real response and praise, because I know, as an Asian person, I know what this guy, who kind of he is, and his character, and where he was coming from, and it's kind of my stance in Kogi. Like sometimes when I take a picture in front of the Kogi truck, and like just being proud and, fearless and a master, a master maybe in your technique, but also in your head, and then just thinking about that time period and whatever else could be going on in this city, in this country, and how he's either oblivious to it or doesn't care about it, or is willing to go against it and stand above it, and so that was straight gangster to me.
And so much of this is also about like navigating tourism, right? On the one hand, like a lot of Chinese restaurant menus were clearly, with English language menus, going for not necessarily Chinese only clientele, right? Especially in New Chinatown. And Roy, you've been very active in terms of kind of rethinking contemporary Chinatown. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about how you navigate kind of community pride and kind of cultural pride on the one hand, mm-hmm. and opening it up and getting people who might not know about it to come in and sit down at Chego or come and visit Chinatown?
Well, I've been very fortunate to be accepted by these communities. Like I've done it 3 times already in this city. First of all, with taco trucks, and with the Latino community here in Los Angeles, and the whole lonchera culture. They're the ones that call me Papi Chulo. They've given me, from the moment I stepped on the truck lots, they gave me respect. They knew I was there not to bastardize the culture, but to move it forward. And there was just a strength in that, and I tried to live up to that every day. Secondly was Chinatown. I was going into Chinatown, and me not being Chinese, but building a restaurant that spoke to the community. What we did was, way before the restaurant opened, just spent time there, got to know everyone in the community, from the 13, 14-year-old kids in the youth center all the way up to the old timers that have been around since Chinatown moved, to all of the organizations, to the business owners, and all the restaurants. I just told them that what we were here to do and who we are, and then we rolled the Kogi truck in front and fed them all, and and they could feel us, that we were just there to do our best, and really our message was we were there to, because a lot of your kids know the Kogi truck, and we're here to feed you, and so we're not a foreigner, and they knew right away. And then recently was with Koreatown, was to go into Koreatown, into a community, and serve my elders Korean food that's not Korean, and the biggest, it was tough, man. The first 4 months of the restaurant, I think they wanted to kill me, to be honest. Like, I was being called a traitor. I was being called someone that didn't understand my own culture, that wasn't trained in this food. How dare you? But we kept trying and kept sticking to what we believed in, and eventually won them over. So I think it was our honesty through all. And then now I'm about to go on to another venture where I'm going to feed Watts, with local, and that's a whole nother community that has let me in. So I'm batting 4 for 4, and Watts, we didn't just pick Watts. Watts allowed us to come in. You don't just go to Watts and say, okay, I'm here. Like Watts is a deep community, and they're the ones that told us that you're good, man, you're good here. We got you. And
where is it going to be?
It's going to be on 103rd between Anzac and Grape Street, right across from the Jordan Downs housing projects. Yeah. And it's going to be beautiful, man, really beautiful. The
last image I wanted to show ties in with this. This is actually Mame's own menu from get the right year, from 1973, with an original David Hockney painting on the cover. And Ma Maison was one of those restaurants that was so crucial in the food revolution, that kind of got everyone talking about local ingredients and new techniques and all of the things that, in a way, Roy's restaurants riffs on. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering, and so this is one extreme, right? We go into kind of healthy, organic, farm-to-table, fine dining that's super expensive. Mm-hmm. Yet with local, you're taking those ideas and putting it into another space, and doing kind of, quote unquote, you're calling it healthy fast food.
Yeah, local is just, it's an attempt. It's like maybe what you do here, it's as a professor. We're just trying to stretch the boundaries of what our brain thinks is normal and what our life thinks is normal, and critically analyze it and look at it and ask questions and get smart minds and people with good hearts around it to debate about it and look at it and break it apart and ask ourselves why do we have these divides between access of food and certain types of food, and who gets to eat certain types of food. So we're trying to look at the markups in food and what our eyes and our culture tells us is acceptable as far as what we see in the marketplace. Because there's so much food that's being thrown away in this country because our eyes tell us it's not delicious, and that it's not acceptable. So we're trying to challenge that and really look at just the whole idea of this capitalism of food, of like, maybe we're just lost, as a society, as a people. Maybe we're just lost, and maybe we've just got to a point where we've taken the soul out of it and we're just focused on the money part of it. And what if we just didn't focus on the money part for a minute and we just decided to cook for you like we were cooking at a barbecue or at a family dinner? And that's how we're going to start local. And because we're two chefs, and because we've set the boundaries as to what is the philosophy of this company, people have to buy into that. Investors have to buy into that. And amazingly, it's been, we just finished the most successful crowdfunding food campaign ever in Indiegogo. We have investors lining up to invest in this, and I'm telling them, listen, you're not going to make money. This is like a research project. Right. And they're like, shit, where do I sign?
I know nothing about that experience.
You know nothing.
Yeah.
But, they built this hall.
Yes,
and
they
ain't getting no money back. And the thing is that well, they get tuitions, but essentially it is for the seed of learning.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's what we want to explore with local. We're not going to be the only ones. Right. Like, there's not only one university in this world. We're not going to be, but we want to explore what does it mean to feed people without money being the only factor and being the driving factor.
And when is the opening in Watts?
Hopefully September.
Great.
Yeah.
So we've got about 10 minutes left. I would love to open it up and see what kind of conversations or questions folks have from the audience.
Yeah,
shout it out
first.
Correct.
What was the difference? Did you find a difference?
Yes. So that restaurant, which, as far as I know, because I've seen that ad, it's actually very funny because it was a Mexican restaurant called Mexican Restaurant that was owned by a Mexican chef that served some things that they said Mexican, but the bulk of the ad was like, we also serve American, Italian, French, so it's like Mexican restaurant, come get, French food. So we've got most of the menus that deal with what we now might think of as Mexican food from all spectrums, was most often called Spanish food in Los Angeles, and that a lot of that was a kind of throwback to the kind of mythic, magical Ramona Spanish colonial past. That a lot of restaurants were eager to try to get non-Latinos to buy into Mexican food by calling it Spanish food. And it really wasn't until increasing shifts in immigration throughout the 1950s, really into the 1960s, where you start seeing Mexican restaurants that are proud to be Mexican restaurants by name, but more specifically, regional Mexican restaurants. So you start seeing Sonoran restaurants, Oaxacan restaurants, et cetera. So it's really fascinating. There's a menu that... There's one that was a Thrifty's menu, for example, that had a Mexican portion of their menu that they called Thrifty's Spanish Kitchen. So they had sombreros and sarapes, but they called it Spanish. And this was really meant, again, to be geared to a kind of romantic, nostalgia for that period. Yeah, but I love that you know that ad. It's a great ad, yeah.
We'll go here, and then we'll come back over there. That's a good question.
It was painful. It was kind of arbitrary, and we wanted to, on the one hand, represent menus that we thought were important, that would be important for historians. Sometimes there were restaurants and menus that I had to make a decision. Well, maybe those are over, like they're already around online. People are talked about them a lot. Although we have the Brown Derbies in the book, but I almost didn't want any Brown Derby menus in the book for that reason. I wanted to make sure to get menus in here that I thought people had never seen before. But I really did. It was a curatorial process. So I chose menus to help me tell the story I wanted to tell, which is very much a part of this. We had a point. We had a vision behind it. So I tried to choose menus that helped us think about race, helped us think about class, gender, about community change and transformation in the city. How can menus help us understand how LA became a modern city? So a lot of things are left out. And I know the first thing when people open this book is going to be like, where's this menu? And get really mad. So bring it. We're ready.
I'm going to go in the middle and come across right here.
It's a great question.
It's a great question.
I don't recall anything relating to drought. I would say, and really very little reference to ecological and environmental issues, to be honest, on the menus. There's a menu that we never found that I end the book with for a restaurant, if anyone has it, for the LA Los Angeles Women's Saloon and Parlor from the 70s, which was that I know of, the only avowedly feminist restaurant in the history of Los Angeles. And it was founded as a feminist restaurant, was located in the women's building for a short time. And they, on a menu I've read about, never seen, talked about environmental issues on their menus, also refused to serve lettuce in support of the farm worker strikes, and did all kinds of really interesting things, alliance building through politics. But drought, Not so much. But one thing that did happen that is not totally related to this directly, but is right as we started working on the book, Little Joe's in Chinatown was being demolished. I don't know if people remember Little Joe's, Italian-American restaurant that had been there since the 30s on Broadway. And it had been empty, and then was, I think 2 years ago, or a year ago, they started to knock it down. And it was a great historical site for all kinds of reasons in terms of the Italian-American community. But lo and behold, they knock it down only to find what is it built on top of but the original Zagna Madre water pipeline of the city, right? So where our original water source for the original city was buried underneath Little Joe's Italian-American restaurant. And those kinds of collisions where we think about like restaurants' connection to sources of food, sources of water, where stuff comes from and what we take for granted. My hope is the book is helps answer some questions, but also is going to raise so many more, and I can't wait for the next person to write a book about this.
And I think you can see in the menus, in the food itself, maybe they're not political statements or dealing with them directly, but you see how people were eating and they were using the whole animal, they were using kidneys, and so you see a different society in which ecological lifestyle was just a norm. You know, you just wouldn't think of only buying a center cut piece of meat. Yeah. You're using everything. There were radishes, turnips, you know, stems and leaves and greens, and so a lot of things were just what was around you used up. So that, I think that told us a lot. Back there. Hi. It would have been good, right?
Actually, let's do it. So. We're gonna from now, but it'll be a vegetarian Jewish deli.
Yes. Call ham.
Can we do that?
Yeah, in an Orthodox neighborhood.
Yeah, let's crowdfund.
Yeah.
All right.
My question is, when you were looking through the archives, did you focus only on English text menus, or did you like do some translations of like other languages, or did you focus on languages that only did English, or had like Spanglish or Chicano or Black English vernacular?
I mean that. Well, I'll let him answer the meat of it, but that's a lot of where we started to ask the questions of what we're not finding. And what I mentioned earlier as far as like, you know, verbal menus or menus that were just thrown away. These were the only things that we could find, and most of them were in English, right?
Yeah, I mean, in the book, though, I mean, it's English dominant, but there's plenty of menus in Mandarin,
that's right.
Plenty of menus in Spanish. Spanglish menus, nothing, if I'm understanding the way you're approaching Spanglish, not maybe in the modern notion of Spanglish, but a kind of, you know, interspersing Spanish language food names with English. Linguistically, the menus are really interesting, and particularly you see this in Chinese restaurants, where restaurants make a very clear decision to either put their menus in Mandarin or in English. And you can start to see it. It tells you a lot about who they think they're going to be catering to. And that kind of tourist shift, language is a really, really, really big part of it, because the menu is your passport in a way. It's the first thing that people are going to hold in their hand to understand, do they belong here or not. I think right now we're living in a time where non-English menus, it's a much more open culture in terms of folks saying, I don't care, I want to go and you know, somebody break down this menu for me.
Here. Last question. Last question.
I understand that your project is a historical look, but I'm curious to know, this could be hypothetical, but what a contemporary look at Los Angeles menus would tell us about diversity and race relations in this city.
Well, I think we explored that through the text of the book, because he called upon many current chefs and food writers. Did Jonathan make it? Okay, yeah. Jonathan Gold is in there, and but I think it's through the old archives and then using that as a window to our current state and new questions.
Yeah, and I would say Roy's absolutely right. Jonathan's in there. Bricia Lopez, you know, the Guelaguetza restaurant is in the book. I think that those issues are actually being talked about pretty well right now, and I think Jonathan Gold is doing it in pretty much every review that he writes, where he's trying to, and he's always thought about, if you read, you know, his book Counterintelligence, for example, his collected writings, from the 90s and 2000s, that's a view of multiracial, multi-ethnic Los Angeles, of immigrant LA. So I think that's not to say there shouldn't be more books. They absolutely should. My hope with this one was that we just didn't know the prehistory. And that LA, we can be really presentist in this town. Like, we tear stuff down real quick to put up new things. And we forget about the bones and we forget about where things come from. And so my hope is that the contemporary conversation that we all should be having can now have a little bit more historical ammo to help ground it and understand the processes. But you should write that book too.
You're right there. And we had a little bit of with the pot menu. He showed you that. But yeah, maybe it's a second book.
We done? The book comes out in June. We've got pre-order cards. If people are interested, you can get a discount if you pre-order soon now. Come on up here for those if you're interested. The exhibit opens on June 13th at LA Public Library, Central Library downtown. Thank you guys for coming.
Roy
Choi, thank you, man.